Good morning, everyone. Audio talk this morning entitled Living in the Presence of the Soul, which we always try to do. Let's just have a few moments of nice, peaceful relaxation, nice and quiet. Breathe out any tension that you have. Just be nice and relaxed and all ready to take in the words that you're going to hear. Hopefully they'll be helpful to you in these difficult times. Breathe out any tension, relax. Well, H.P. Blavatsky stated in her article, The Beacon Light of Truth, that in most cases, man dies without having lived for one moment in the presence of his own soul, swept away as he is by the whirlwind of egoistic and mundane affairs. Certainly most of us are swallowed up by our day-to-day activities and have little time to contemplate the deeper things of life, those things that are permanent and really matter to us. What we need to be doing is reasserting ourselves as spiritual beings and adapting our lives accordingly. That is what we are in reality once the clouds of our material leanings lift. So this talk is mainly going to look at some of the teachings of H.P. Blavatsky, the masters and some early Theosophists, what they wrote upon the subject. So there are quite a few quotes. The statement in the title is probably the most practical one of all for us all to follow. Of course, the expression soul is open to many interpretations. In the Key to Theosophy by H.P. Blavatsky, she mentions the principles of man and the soul. In this sense, the soul means the spiritual divine ego. This is the spiritual soul or buddhi, in close union with manas, the mind principle, without which it is no ego at all, but only the atmic vehicle. So to live in the presence of the soul, to me, means to cultivate the mind so that it becomes illumined by the light of buddhi, the intuitive dimension to our being. That is our real task. We can take it that the soul that we should be trying to live in the presence of as theosophical and spiritual students is this spiritual soul or buddhi, or buddhi manas. Of course, many people live in the presence of their lower souls, and a multitude of problems spring from this. Our task in the great journey is to awaken to what we truly are in essence and live in the light of that realization. It's a bit like the Zen master Bankei saying that we should not be striving to become Buddhas, but trying to remain Buddhas, or Buddha, which means enlightened, of course. Because what we imagine ourselves to be here and now at this moment is not what we are in reality. We are influenced by the conditioning we go through during our lives due to living in a materially based society. So all of our education is based upon these materialistic ideas. As Plato says, all true learning is merely recollection. It's all there. We just need to try to bring it to the surface. So we need to try to begin to act as spiritual beings. The greatest gift that we can give others is to help them to awaken to what they truly are in essence, to help them to become aware of their own inherent divinity, and to teach them that far from being weak and miserable sinners, they are in fact children of the light and immortal in their true nature. It needs people who are alive to the essence of theosophical teaching to make it a living reality in their daily lives. This cannot be done by just giving them facts from books. H.P. Blavatsky says in her messages to the American conventions, orthodoxy in theosophy is a thing neither possible nor desirable. It is diversity of opinion within certain limits that keeps the Theosophical Society a living and healthy body, its many other ugly features notwithstanding. Were it not also for the existence of a large amount of uncertainty in the minds of students of Theosophy, such healthy divergences would be impossible, and the society would degenerate into a sect in which a narrow and stereotyped creed would take the place of the living and breathing spirit of truth and an ever-growing knowledge. So this is extremely important to take on board. Even in the Theosophical Society, I've heard members criticising another's way of looking at the teachings, but we have no right to do this, as there is no set way to approach them. So long as we study the teachings that the Masters gave us through H.P. Blavatsky and use our intuitions to extract the essence to make it a living reality in our lives. The failure of most of the major religions is that the majority of the followers have fallen into the dead letter of the teachings and killed the living spirit. It is easy also to do this with any spiritual teachings, even theosophical ones. This is because we feel that gathering information and remembering facts concerning theosophy and spirituality in general is actually understanding what theosophy or spirituality is in reality. Also, we tend to speak with authority as though we know these things, when in fact we are only repeating what we have read in books. It is thus have I heard more than thus I know. In the voice of the silence, it says that some people say, thus have I heard, and others are very arrogant in saying, thus I know, unless they know through their intuitions, of course, which is very rare. Well, speaking for myself anyway, it's a rather complex situation, as of course we must have a trust in the words of the Masters in the same way that children must trust their teachers. Otherwise, their view of the world will be based upon wrong conclusions. So as our teachers, we need to trust them, the Masters, but also to bring our own intuitions into play so that we don't fall into the dead letter that kills. Think of the orthodox scientists who just go through the motions and follow slavishly what they have learned at university, etc. Most great breakthroughs in science were accomplished by unorthodox scientists, many who were at first laughed to scorn by their contemporaries. Yet most of them had been through the same initiatory training, but their understanding and use of it was more enlightened, and they could think out of the box. We could apply a similar thought to theosophy, to theosophical training, and to try to get to the essence of what was being said. It is often much different than what appeared to be said. Primarily, we as students of theosophy should be thinking of ways to apply the teachings for the good of humanity as a whole. H.P. Blavatsky, in the quote I just used, was warning us not to go the way of nearly all religions and philosophies and split into so many sects, each believing themselves to be right and in the possession of truth. She even says that we should not expect to get the truth from the secret doctrine, which was her major work. or any other spiritual teachings, but to see how far they can lead us towards the truth. This is very important to understand, that words and ideas can never encompass the truth. That has to be realized and understood by each one of us individually and inwardly. It's an inward process. Theosophy should teach the animal man or woman to be a human man or woman. Yes, we are swept away by the whirlwind of egotistic and mundane affairs. We are all very much children of our age, and we react and draw our opinions of situations in an orthodox way. Whereas as students of spirituality, our worldview in many cases should be almost the opposite of the general run of humanity, as we hopefully are given by the masters deeper insights into the human condition, or any of the great world teachers. But in most cases, though we speak of theosophical principles, our lives do not in general reflect them. It is very hard to swim against the stream, which we need to do at times. H. People of Blavatsky and the Masters were very much aware of the trends that were emerging. She writes in an article, Our Cycle and the Next, which I've used quite a few times in my talks. She says, if theosophy, prevailing in the struggle, its all-embracing philosophy strikes deep root into the minds and hearts of man, if its doctrines of reincarnation and karma, in other words, of hope and responsibility, find a home in the lives of the new generations, then indeed will dawn the day of joy and gladness for all who now suffer and are outcast. For real theosophy is altruism, and we cannot repeat it too often. It is brotherly love, mutual help, unswerving devotion to truth. If once men do but realise that in these alone can true happiness be found, and never in wealth, possessions, or any selfish gratification, then the dark clouds will roll away, and a new humanity will be born upon earth. Then the golden age will be there indeed. And then she gives this warning, but if not, then the storm will burst, and our boasted Western civilization and enlightenment will sink into such a sea of horror that its parallel history has never yet recorded. Unfortunately, as humanity as a whole has not grasped this idea of universal brotherhood, hence the two world wars and the never-ending conflicts worldwide, terrorism, etc., are all very prevalent. So all that we learn and understand should only be for the good of the whole. This should be our line of life meditation. If we are to put theosophy and real spiritual teachings into practice, we should develop the power not just to feel ourselves as spiritual beings, but to feel it in others too, and to treat them accordingly as individuals and as groups. It is very easy to see that we do not live in a very compassionate society. It's certainly improved over the past centuries with so many charitable organisations springing up. But the very fact that we have to appeal to the public for funding whilst billions are spent on wars and non-important things like Olympics and football World Cups show that our priorities are wrong. I'm not saying these things shouldn't be, but well, apart from wars, of course, but we should have our priorities right. The present world-wide economic crisis may be due to the karmic effects of our obsession with money and the belief that it can solve every problem. Society certainly has a love of money, and we all know that the love of money is the root of all evil. Money, 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 as the song goes. People live and die for bits of metal and paper, which have become the driving force of modern society. And those without it suffer at the hands of those who covet it. Compassion speaks and says, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? As it says in The Voice of the Silence. H.P. Blavatsky says in an article, Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, materialism and indifference to all, save the selfish realization of wealth and power and the overfeeding of national and personal vanity, have gradually led nations and men to the almost entire oblivion of spiritual ideals, of the love of nature, to the correct appreciation of things, like a hideous leprosy or Western civilization has eaten its way through all the quarters of the globe and hardened the human heart. Very profound. In this article, she shows that even in Victorian times, society put wealth before spirituality and nature. Since then, we've gone down from there in some ways. We are certainly not much different. In many ways, our hearts have been hardened generally. It's all survival of the fittest, this kind of attitude. Of course, there will always be compassionate souls in the world, of course, working for the good on various levels. But the fact that these people stand out so much shows the failings of society in general. They're fighting an uphill struggle. Also, we must remember, above all, that H.P. Blavatsky said that we should never despair of the human race. No true theosophist will ever do that. Through the internet and other improved methods of communication, we're becoming more aware of what is happening worldwide. And there's an outpouring of positive reaction to natural disasters, of victims of war or acts of terrorism, as we're finding now with the conflict in the Ukraine. So we should remain optimistic whilst being aware of the shortfalls of society at this time, and always look for ways that we can help in the task of world improvement, no matter how small is our contribution. I must add now that recent events have shown how goodness comes to the fore in people when there is great tragedy, and people come together in love, and the fact that we are all one in essence is revealed and shown clearly. Attempts to turn us against each other and create antagonism mainly backfire. There are those weak-willed ones who are affected by these attempts, and they're affected by these attempts, but overall the outcome is positive. So there is terrible suffering for the victims and their families. Roll on the day when we can love each other unconditionally, as Gautama Buddha and Jesus taught. And H.P. Blavatsky stated, again, it's a quote I've used before, I never tire of using it. Thousands of men and women who belong to no church, sect or society, who are neither theosophists nor spiritualists, are yet virtually members of that silent brotherhood, the units of which do not know each other, belonging as they do to nations far and wide apart, yet each of whom carries on his brow or her brow the mark of the mysterious karmic seal, the seal that makes of him or her a member of the brotherhood of the elect of thought. Having failed to satisfy their aspirations in their respective orthodox faiths, they have severed themselves from their churches in soul when not in body, and are devoting the rest of their lives to the worship of loftier and purer ideals than any intellectual speculation can give them. How few in comparison to their numbers, and how rarely one meets with such. Yet their name is Legion, if they only chose to reveal themselves. I tend to use that quite a few times because it's something that we have to get into our minds. H.P. Blavatsky said that there were more theosophists outside the society than in it. And she was meaning, of course, not members of the Theosophical Society, but people who live a spiritual life, a theosophical life. In other words, don't hide your light under a bushel, but place it where it gives light to everyone. The masters said that they wanted a universal fraternity, a real brotherhood of humanity started. We should try to make that our motive in all that we do. To do this, we need to take the stance that we are spiritual beings, that in reality, and that we are not just creatures of a day, or 25,000 or so days, or a few decades. That's how long we live, that's all. But eternal beings. This is, of course, the whole purpose of the secret doctrine, to show us that very fact. We can get lost in details. The mind can be lost in a labyrinth of words like a man in a thick forest, as the crest jewel of wisdom by Shankaracharya tells us. So our minds can be swallowed up by details instead of grasping the essence and understanding the motive of the brotherhood of bodhisattvas that revealed it to the world under the guidance of Gautama Buddha. We're said to have initiated the attempt in the last quarter of the 19th century through H.P. Blavatsky. Now the mind is the great slayer of the real, says the voice of the silence, and it finds countless ways to prevent us from seeing ourselves as spiritual beings. It gives us doubts and fears, but in all of this we need to stand firm and remember who and what we are. It's about awakening. We are what we are always. We just need to wake up to remember. There's a tendency to separate what we learn in our studies from actual practice, to take the same attitude to Theosophy that we do to studying maths or geography. But it is entirely different, of course. H.P. Blavatsky states in the Bowen Notes on how to study Theosophy, come to the secret doctrine, she says, without any hope of getting the final truth of existence from it, or with any idea other than seeing how far it may lead towards the truth. See in study a means of exercising and developing the mind, never touched by other studies. So that's an interesting attitude. She's saying with what all the esoteric and even some exoteric teachings say, that truth is beyond words and can never be encompassed by them. People nowadays revel in learning facts. Our education system relies on memorizing facts, and even in spiritual traditions, people enjoy sitting back and absorbing facts that often make no difference whatsoever to their lifestyle, though they often imagine that they do. Or they repeat text, parrot fashion, as many exoteric religions do. She goes on to say that we must keep the idea of oneness of all things, the oneness of all things in our minds during our studies, and not to let any idea of separateness to supervene. She's getting to a state of mind where the teachings are alive. Otherwise, we do all fall into the dead letter. The main thing is to do as Pythagoras says in his golden verses, and take heart, for the race of man is divine. Again, I use this a lot. I did a talk based on that. In Theosophy, we learn about the origins of man and his destiny. We learn that we are now at a stage where we can proceed through self-induced and self-devised efforts. We need to take these ideas and breathe life into them through a conscious love and understanding of our fellow human beings struggling along with us on this journey, on this pilgrimage. Most of society spends a lifetime believing it is something that it definitely is not. We are always exactly what we are, but clouds obscure the sun, clouds of our own making. And a society that has grown materialistic and bases its policies on the fact that we have one life, and the secret of success is survival of the fittest, will always stifle the natural spirituality that we all have buried within. We need to roll back the stone from the cave and step out into the light. Because no matter how complex our intellectuality is in this world, no matter how great our technology, our mental state is still mainly an animalistic one, in that we are taken up with food, finding a mate, reproduction, and making a nest. Look at all the dating, home building, and cookery programs on TV and the internet. All these things are important for the few years we are here. We must never be swallowed up by them. H.P. Blavatsky says in The Key to Theosophy, if the action of one reacts on the lives of all, and this is the true scientific idea, then it is only by all men becoming brothers and all women sisters, and by all practicing in their daily lives true brotherhood and true sisterhood, that the real human solidarity, which lies at the root of the elevation of the race, can ever be attained. It is this action and interaction, this true brotherhood and sisterhood, in which each shall live for all and all for each, which is one of the fundamental theosophical principles that every theosophist should be bound not only to teach, but to carry out in his or her individual life. And later she states how we can achieve this: by the enlightened application of our precepts to practice, by the use of our higher reason, spiritual intuition, and moral sense, and by following the dictates of what we call the still small voice of our conscience, which is that of our ego, and which speaks louder in us than the earthquakes and the thunders of Jehovah, wherein the Lord is not. So by the enlightened application of our precepts to practice, by the use of our higher reason, spiritual intuition, and moral sense, and by following the dictates of what we call the still small voice of our conscience. That's the way we proceed. In other words, to live in the presence of our souls. Again, she emphasizes the enlightened application of our precepts. It is no use, for example, to become a vegetarian because a book tells you or someone coerces you to become. Otherwise, you may grow to resent it. You need to feel that you really want to be a vegetarian as a result of a feeling of compassion towards the animal kingdom. This can be applied on all levels and to many other so-called rules for living. There has to be developed a real preference for something higher. As B.P. Wadia said, it is a kind of spiritual anarchy that we need. One of the definitions of anarchy in the dictionary is a theory that regards the absence of all direct or coercive government as a political ideal, and that proposes the cooperative and voluntary association of individuals and groups as the principal need of organised society. A revolution of thought is needed, but it is the kind of revolution advised by H.P. Blavatsky in her article, The Beacon Light of Truth. I say it again, she says, it is only theosophy well understood that can save the world from despair by reproducing the social and religious reforms once accomplished in history by Gautama, the Buddha. A peaceful reform, without one drop of blood spilt, each one remaining in the faith of his fathers, if he so chooses. But to do this, nothing is necessary, but to reject the parasitical growths that have choked every religion and sect in the world. Let him accept but the essence, which is the same in all. That is to say, the spirit which gives life to man in whom it resides and renders him immortal. That each man who is inclined towards well-doing find his ideal, a star before him to guide him. Let him follow it without ever deviating from his path, and he is almost certain to reach the beacon light of life, truth, no matter whether he seeks for it in a manger or at the bottom of a well. Leo Tolstoy remarked that if Western society had followed the teachings of Jesus, we'd have had no need for governments, armies, or police forces. We now have made a world in which they are necessary, and coercion takes the place of love and compassion. We need to recover the dignity of being human, on this shining globe of ours, and trying to find our place in nature, as the secret doctrine tries to show us, for the purpose of becoming natural and recovering our sanity in a world growing more and more insane. Theosophy is action in action is helping others to awaken from this dream, which often becomes a nightmare for many. In the centre of the storm, there's a calmness that remains unshaken, and we all can find our way to that state. We do not progress by adding, but by subtracting those things that shield our virtues. We are already there, but not aware. So the practical effects of studying Theosophy should be to give us a deeper understanding of nature and our fellow human beings. We should be better able to grasp the beauty and wonder of life beyond the seeming confusion. The masters could well see the effects of materialistic science and dogmatic religion at the time, and wanted us to gain some insight into the real workings of nature and the universe, so that we could better appreciate others and have compassion for those who stray, who, as Jesus said, know not what they do. People act blindly, following mainly the eye for an eye doctrine, rather than that of love. But, as Mahatma Gandhi said, an eye for an eye will make the whole world blind. Theosophy shows that in life on earth, it is really the most transient aspect of our journey, and in many ways, and for most, the worst, most painful physically, mentally, and morally. It is the one stage in which we feel least comfortable. When we move on, we are told that it will be like returning home. We are in places where we feel more at ease with ourselves and all around us. Well, unless you are really evil, an evil person. But for 99.9% of us, we are better off in the long run. Sadly, reincarnation and karma propel us back into physical existence to struggle and suffer some more, and hopefully learn through our experiences. There comes a time of awakening when we can move on to new and exciting realms of being, not vague, dreamy states as they appear to us now, with our limited minds, but more vivid and real than our physical life can ever be. And there's no end to all of this, as far as we know. And the higher we rise, the more spiritual and beautiful we become, and more alive, because we are becoming life itself. But it has nothing to do with the tools we use on earth, words, thoughts, images. These, of course, are very limiting. And they are left behind, having fulfilled their tasks. We also imagine ourselves as having the same form as we have now, and communicating in the same ways. But our forms will be different, completely, and modes of communication on higher levels, beyond our present comprehension. Even way beyond our conceptions of telepathy, which we possess on levels not much higher than the one we are on now. So this gives us a deeper insight into what we will become and the potential of us as humans on the planet now. All this Theosophy reveals to us, and Theosophy in action is to try and treat our fellow humans and our fellow creatures with love and respect, and to always try to see the good in others and to draw out the best in them in whatever ways we can. Physical help, as in the work of the Theosophical Order of Service and other charities, is important, along with showing others our place in the scheme of things, the scheme of nature, and therefore helping them to respect all living things. It is all about the sacredness of life and brotherhood and comradeship that arise as a result of this. Of course, we have to live in this world and fulfill any duties we have, and particularly any we have taken on voluntarily. But at the same time, remembering what the Bhagavad Gita says, that it is better to do one's own duty badly than to do another's duty well. What may be our duty to ourselves? H.P. Blavatsky sums it up in the Key to Theosophy in an answer to a question. To control and conquer through the higher, the lower self, to purify himself inwardly and morally, to fear no one and naught, save the tribunal of his own conscience, never to do a thing by halves, i.e., if he thinks it the right thing to do, let him do it openly and boldly, and if wrong, never touch it at all. It is the duty of a theosophist to lighten his burden by thinking of the wise aphorism of Epictetus, who says, "Be not diverted from your duty by any idle reflection the silly world may make upon you, for the censures are not in your power, and consequently should not be any part of your concern." Very wise words. Again, this is pointing to the fact that we should not slavishly follow what materialistic scientists and politicians tell us. We have to access the deeper knowledge and therefore a much wider understanding of the nature of life and being human. So to recap, the test is to blossom forth as truly human beings and to gain an insight into the very nature of our fellow pilgrims struggling along the path with us. We may think at times, with the state of the world as it is, there is not much that can be done to end the madness and the cruelty that seem to be so predominant. But it is important to remember that all through history, evil has never had the final word and never will. In Theosophy, we are aware that there is a guardian wall that protects us from far worse evils. Though what they might be, given the state of the world, I don't know. If we take the stance of being immortal beings, souls rather than bodies, then our worldview will begin to widen and we will look at life so much differently. Impersonality is said to be the key, but it does not mean coldness. Robert Crosby, an early theosophist who founded the United Lodge of Theosophists, writes, "For practical purposes, if we are developing the child heart, if we are learning to love things beautiful, if we are becoming more honest and plain and simple, if we are beginning to sense the sweet side of life, if we are getting to like our friends better and extending the circle, if we feel ourselves expanding in sympathy, if we love to work for Theosophy and do not ask position as a reward, if we are not bothering too much about whether we are personal or impersonal, this is traveling on the path of impersonality. Yet we are those spiritual beings. At this very moment now, our lower minds and emotions are just clouds that hide the sun that one day will break free and shine on us all and in us all. That is why Pythagoras told us, as I said earlier, to take heart, for the race of man is divine. That is the hope that remains after Pandora's box has been opened. The race of man is divine, so that if the whole planet were destroyed, it would mean little to the true man or woman. If we can somehow awaken to that fact, then we would become beacon lights to all those who are struggling along in the darkness, and there are many doing that. Living in the presence of the soul may seem difficult, but that is merely because in this society we have created complexity and lost contact with simplicity. Indeed, to be simple-souled is the most difficult thing of all to be accomplished by most of us. The lower mind shuts out the spiritual life due to its involvement with so much trivia. To repeat again what Shankaracharya said, the mind is lost in a labyrinth of words like a man in a thick forest. That also goes for images too. We need to simplify our lives, return to nature, not just in a physical sense, but also as regards our inner life too. We have created a world of triviality, shutting out the reality. It's important then to try to see things in perspective and never to condemn others, because they may be walking a path that we have before or will be in the future, or they are learning their own particular lessons in the life that they're in at the moment. Our attitude should always be to help our fellow pilgrims. As Ram Dass says, we are just walking each other home. So may love and light guide us all in our journey, and may we all help to walk each other along the never-ending path towards a universal brotherhood of humanity, regardless of race, creed, sex, caste, or colour. And most of all, in this often cruel world, may we love each other and shine our light in all the dark places we come across, and strive always to live in the presence of the soul. Thank you very much for listening. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.